How's it going, YouTube? Coming in today with another video, and today, guys, what to bring to you is the meta update for June 2022. I really want to go ahead and cover a lot of the changes that I've been seeing in the meta, especially with all the nationals going on and a lot of the regionals that I've been to, because I feel like there's quite the big difference between now and even 3 weeks ago. So if you haven't already checked out my sponsors on Imperium Duelist or Dragon Shield, definitely go over there and check it out. And then if you haven't already ordered a new mat on Imperium Duelist, my new Wear the Handtrap mat is out. Use code GGYGO10 and let's hop right into the video. So the first thing I want to talk about today is going to be what are the best decks in the format. In order, I think the very first deck of the format that's going to be all the best deck as of right now is going to be Dragon Link. So I think that Sword Soul is very close as to being second, but I do think that Dragon just has such a good ability to play into a board going second and also setting up a board going first. With the Adventurer cards, there's just so many different lines of play, and the fact that this deck can also main deck like 12 Handtraps is really insane. Because the deck itself has had so many hits from the ban list, and it's really just been able to change and be very dynamic over every single format. So I think this is a deck, if any, that has a lot of potential to keep doing well into various future formats, just because of the way that the deck plays. Again, the ability to go second is what really hurts a lot of decks from being better, especially if you look at like ABC or like the Sun Avalon deck. I feel like the part that really hurts that deck is the ability to not really be able to go second. So looking at the list here, this is kind of what I'm basing this off of as far as power, consistency, and how well the deck does first and second. So Dragon for me would have to be number one, especially having the ability to side cards even like Eradicator is really insane. Overall, the deck is just very strong, and I see it being very good for a long time coming. And the next deck I have here is Sword Soul. So Sword Soul is just a deck that has just shown ever since Bode that it just has a lot of power, and it really proves that it can keep up with the meta. Again, the ability to go second, especially with those 10E cards. You can choose to play around Nibiru or Token Collector, but sometimes it's hard to play around both. But that can also be helped a little bit with siding if you side in things like Chalice. But I still think that the deck is very strong and has a lot of power moving forward, especially when we get into Split format. If the deck doesn't get hit at all, which I'm sure it will get hit in some capacity, but we will still see this deck being relevant even in Split format. The third best deck of the format, Adventurer Synchro. So Adventurer Synchro has the ability to play a ton of hand traps, and it also doesn't play the Therian cards. I personally really don't like the Therian cards. I just don't really love the fact that if you don't have a target engraved, then they're really dead in your hand, and it just really is something that can brick out your deck a lot. So it's something to say too that the Adventurer Synchro deck just feels a lot more consistent, and it plays a lot more starters. It's also just one of the strongest decks that we have available to us right now, and I'm very happy with seeing its results so far. I think this definitely has a lot of potential moving forward. It's very close to the sad deck, so I think that's really impactful to bring up here because of the fact that this deck is so strong, and it just has so much playability in our format. The number 4 slot here is going to be Drytron. Now, we've been seeing this deck for a long time already, and the fact that we got 2 Ben 10 back for the ban list was pretty insane. It caught a lot of people off guard, but that means that this deck still has a lot of ways to play this format. The ability to have cards like Diviner in your deck that can either be a search engine or it can go ahead and be an interruption, which is even crazier. Drytron also just has this innate ability to be able to be a combo deck in game 1 and game 2 go ahead and side cards like Mystic Mine, and that's something that I feel like is unfair about Mystic Mine is whenever combo decks start being able to side it, because you're not putting in back or out for Drytron. It's just not something that you do. But now you should really think about it if you're playing against the deck because of the fact that they do side deck Mystic Mine. So that's pretty crazy. Also being able to go second and make a quick Zeus, have so many different names in the graveyard and be able to extend very far. And then Natasha alone is just such a crazy card. We've been seeing Magic Key variants, the Amorphactor variant, we had the Megalith variant. There's so many different kinds of Drytron out there that I feel like the deck is just so unique, and it's something that's definitely in our number 4 spot. Now, all the way down at number 5, we have Despia, and this is a deck that fell off hard. And that doesn't mean that the deck's like bad, but it's something that has been aggressively mid ever since it started. And there was a time in the format where everyone just played Despia because no one really knew how to counter it, and everything seemed really lackluster to do about the deck. But now that a lot more people have played against it and a lot more people are comfortable in the Despia matchup, I think that it's back down to number 5 now, where it probably should have been when it started. But again, when a new deck hits the format and it's really strong and there's not a lot of known counters for it yet, it can get kind of daunting to really be able to beat that deck. So I still think that Despia has a lot of very cool options to it. It can still play a lot of very insane cards, also having cards like Mirror Jade and the Dragos Tapelia, things like Super Poly, still very solid, but it's just not one of the best decks anymore. It's more like the top 5 decks. But I still think that it has a lot of potential, and I'm sure that we'll still be seeing more support for it moving forward. So I do want to talk about what our best rogue options are to us right now as well. I didn't really want to go like 1 to 10 because I feel like between like 5 and even 15, there's just so many different decks right now. And we'll talk about how I feel about that in one format at the end of the video. So the first best rogue deck that we have here is going to be DDD. I still think that this has a ton of potential, especially with decks like Despia becoming less popular. I think that that's one deck that really did shut down the DDD deck, and I think that this is something that if you are someone who has played the deck for a while, that this is something that can be very rewarding, and it's also fairly cheap to pick up. So I think that is a really nice deck to play, but it's something that does hold a very high ceiling, so be careful if you are picking it up, because this can be something that can be very daunting to play. So just make sure that you test it a lot online before you go ahead and just pick it up. The next deck that I have for you is going to be Adagnister. This is a deck that just got Heat Soul. It can still put up a very big towers, and it's still very consistent. And so if you look at the YCS results from the Hartford, we had 1 DDD and 1 Adagnister in the top 32, which is very impressive. And I feel like that says a lot about Adagnister and what the deck can really accomplish. And I still think that's a very good choice right now. For number 3, we have Cyberus Eldritch, the new Cyberus Eldritch, which is Marincess Eldritch. I think this deck is actually really cool from what I've seen so far. It can do quite a bit, and I think this is something that we definitely want to start looking out for. Even at the regional that I was at yesterday, because the set just dropped this weekend, we already saw it doing pretty well. So this is something that I think that you should be aware that it's going to be in the format, and it's really not a bad option. For number 4, we have Salamangreat. So a lot of people probably think that Salamangreat is more toward like tier 2, but I still think that it's more so rogue because the deck did get back things like Circle, but it still acts as Code Turbo. Even if it did get Heat Soul, the deck's just not putting up any results right now. Even if you see it like once or twice, it's still not doing enough for me to warrant it at any tier. I'd rather just put it into rogue. I think that the deck is still pretty solid, and it's something that is going to be a nice contender, but I don't think that it's anywhere near like meta per se. And then for number 5, I have Live Twin. I think this deck is really underrated, especially with Desires coming back to 2. I think this is a deck that got really hurt by having Desires to 1 because it really thrives off having card advantage. And the fact that it plays 3 of everything in the deck, I think that's very important for it to have that draw power. But it's still a deck that if you're playing the deck very well and you play a lot of hand traps, I think that it catches a lot of people off guard. So the next thing that I want to talk about is going to be Effect Negation is very important in this format. So having cards like Imperm, Valor, Ash in your deck is going to be very, very important, I think, because of the fact of cards like Hulk being in the format still. If Hulk resolves in the Punk decks, even in Dragon, it's something that you just really don't want to happen because of the Red Rose coming out and giving a lot of free extenders, right? Because even in the Dragon deck, being able to go Hulk, summon Red Rose, go into your Baron, summon back Rox Rose, get the additional Dragon extender too, that's something that you just really don't want that deck to have. So definitely go ahead and negate Hulk at any point in time that you can against any of the Punk decks in Dragon. Just do not let Hulk resolve this format because it's something that will really turn around and make a very big board. So I think that the Scythe Lock is really irrelevant outside of like the Adventure Synchro deck. It can happen in the Peas deck. The Punk Eldritch Adventure Synchro deck, they also do the Scythe Lock. But outside of those two decks, you won't really see a ton of the Scythe Lock. But it's still something where you want to go ahead and negate the Hulk at all means necessary. The next thing that I have for you today is going to be talking about which is better, Dark Ruler or Droplet. Now there's arguments for both here, but I think that Droplet is still the best card in the format. I think that it's the best card in the game, to be completely honest with you. But Dark Ruler is really nice against the bigger established boards. If you're playing against decks like the Sun Avalon deck, I think that it's better. But if you're playing against decks like Dragon, I think Droplet's just better because of the fact that if they have like a Rose Shoot set or another card, they can go ahead and chain it and then use Hot Red to negate things like Dark Ruler, whereas if you have Droplet, you can go ahead and just negate things where they can't respond. So I think that they're really good in their own respects because of the fact that things like Dark Ruler are better against like the Sun Avalon deck, and Droplet's better against like the Dragon deck. But there's also certain combos like the P.U.N.K Synchro combo that can put up Heralds. You know, you'd have to use a Dark Ruler. So I think that there's been a lot of arguments back and forth of which one should you play. And I think that they both have a lot of their own uses. So like if you're maining Droplets, maybe use side Dark Ruler. I think that that's fine. It just really depends on what deck you respect more in the format. It really comes down to what deck you're playing and how you edit your sideboard to go ahead and counter the meta. So these cards are always going to be interchangeable, but sometimes Droplet is just inherently better and sometimes Dark Ruler is just inherently better. So it really does depend on the format. The next thing that I have for you today is going to be what are the best hand traps of the format, and that's going to be Droll and Nibiru. These cards are insane right now. So I know that Ash, Imper, and Valor are all very good, and then Valor is something that a lot of people have just not been playing for a very long time, and they've all said that it's very bad. But especially going in right now, Effect Negation is just so good, where Valor is just very, very good. But Droll and Nibiru are just cards that you have to be playing right now. If you're not maining them, you're siding them, and I definitely recommend to go ahead and just main deck Droll if you can, because it's just a card that really does skip turns. It's something right now alone just does so much for you. So this is something too where you really have to make sure that you're not playing into Gamma though, because there's a lot of decks that are main decking Gamma because of the fact that you have cards like Droll in the main deck. So you have to wait for if they search like the Xiamen and then they summon Xiamen and then they search with that, that's when you go ahead and hit with Droll. Because if you do it preemptively and you get hit with Gamma, that's going to be a really hard game to win because you're giving them a free Chaotic Ruler. So definitely go ahead and keep that in mind if you are going to go ahead and Droll someone, just because of the repercussions of Drolling on an open game board. Because Gamma is very good. The next thing I want to talk about is going to be turn player priority. This is something that I've been seeing a lot of people mess up, and I really want to make sure that it's something that we all know how it works. So the first thing that we'll use as an example here is going to be Ray versus Super Poly. If you play Striker against Despia, and you normal summon Ray, and your opponent has a set Super Poly, you're allowed to use a quick effect on summon before your opponent can use a quick effect, because of turn player priority. So if you think that your opponent has a Super Poly, and if they're playing Despia or Predaplant, you should always assume that the set is a Super Poly. You go normal summon Ray, on summon effect of Ray, and then you tag out a go like Hayate, and that way you can go ahead and just easily play around Super Poly. Of course, unless they have like a Fallen of Albaz set, and that's just unfortunate, but I'd rather risk them not having a Fallen of Albaz and going straight into Hayate versus just losing my monster altogether, right? So definitely go ahead on summon and just go Ray effect, summon Hayate, and play around the Super Poly. It's the same thing as when you're playing against the Despia deck and they have an Albion in the graveyard, or if you're playing against a deck that has a DPE in the graveyard. When you get to that phase where DPE is in the graveyard and your opponent wants to bring it back, if you are turn player, you can pass priority to your opponent whenever you want. They can't determine when that is. So if you have a lot of activations and a lot of plays you want to do in standby phase before your opponent brings back their DPE, you are allowed to do that. So the better example of this is going to be DD Crow versus Albion. If you are in your end phase, and let's say you have a DD Crow-like effect, so let's say you go Shizuku effect, and then your opponent goes Chain Albion, they're not allowed to use Albion until you let them have the priority in the end phase. So what this means is that you can go ahead and use Shizuku's effect, search Shark Cannon, and then go ahead and Shark Cannon banish the Albion, and then go, okay, it's your priority now. Would you like to activate any effects in the end phase? And this is something that is very common when you look back to cards like Amano Awato, if you look back to cards like Card of Demise. This was a very common interaction where you would declare Card of Demise to clear your hand, and then you would declare Amano Awato to go back to your hand, and then you would be able to keep your Amano Awato. So turn player priority, it's very important, and it's something that you really have to know, you really have to learn, because I've seen a lot of people lose to this, where this is just very avoidable. So hopefully that helps, because that's something that will come up a lot in Yu-Gi-Oh! So the next thing that I want to talk about is the problem with our format right now. I feel like our format just has too many good decks at the moment, and it's something that I don't think is very healthy for the game. I think that even in formats like Zodiac, where it's just one deck, it's just really cool, and there's a lot of really nice interaction because of the fact that it's just one deck. deck, and it's realistically whoever knows the mirror match better and whoever knows the deck better. And so I feel like there's a lot of thought that goes into your tech cards and really being able to play around that mirror match. And so that's something that I think is really cool, and that's a format that I really do enjoy. Also triangle formats, because yes, there's a couple of periphery decks that are like the 4th best and like the 5th best, but it's usually just the big 3, right? And that's something that I think is really cool as well, because usually you just cater your main deck to beat the deck that you're having a hard time against, but then your deck just absolutely destroys the other deck that you already should be winning against, right? So I think that those formats are really cool because it's a lot healthier for siding as well. Whenever you have a format like ours right now where there's like 15 good decks and you have to sideboard to account for all of them, it gets really kind of hard sometimes, because you have to really make sure that you're hitting the better decks, but then you got to be worried about like certain rogue or tier 2 decks as well. So you have to find a lot of crossovers, and so that's not exactly the worst thing to have to do, but it's also never the best. And I think that's where a lot of players right now are seeing an issue with our current format, and I don't disagree. I think that I'd rather have a format like a Zodiac format or a triangle format. So if you liked the video today, definitely go ahead and join my Discord, Twitch, Twitter communities. And then if you want a coaching session over at Metafy, definitely go ahead and let me know. Go and sign up over there or PM me on Discord and we can talk about that. All of the links to everything are in the description below. Thank you all for 14,000 subscribers, and we're on our way to 15,000. I'll catch you all on the next one. Thank you.